Happy Friday, everyone. Hope you all are doing well. This is our first intentional conversations of the month of June, and we're so glad that you're here with us. I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. Shout out the NWC team. The team works tirelessly every single day to make sure that we can bring this virtual production experience to each of you so that we can learn with and from each other. So I'm so grateful for the support. And the team has been doing this for the past 5 years. And so this is a milestone year for us in terms of intentional conversations. And we could not have been here at this milestone if it weren't for you, our community. So we're so grateful for your support, for seeing this as a space and time that you want to connect to. And we're really grateful. I invite you to go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from today. That is always a treat for us to be able to see the many different geographies that are represented. Oftentimes we have folks from all over the US, and even we have some visitors every now and again from outside of the US, and we're so grateful. I want you to know that if you're here as part of our Zoom community, then we do welcome smiling faces. So if you want to have those cameras on, we do certainly encourage that, but it's definitely not an expectation. We know that many of you join the conversation while you're multitasking, and we're just grateful that you're here in whatever capacity. I also want you to know that at NWC, we truly value disability inclusion, and as such, we have enabled the closed caption feature for those of you who find that that would enhance your experience. We want to make sure that you know that's available to you. There are many ways that people can be a part of our community, and not only do they register in advance to be a part of the Zoom community, but also there are many folks who may catch intentional conversations through our LinkedIn Live. So if that is you, we welcome you, all of you LinkedIn Live folks. We're so glad you are here. Make sure that you're using the comment section if you want to engage in dialogue today. My team is watching that. We're bringing a lot of those sentiments and expressions over to Zoom so that we all are connected as one big community, and we are incredibly grateful. I hope that you will enjoy today's show. I look forward to introducing our guest co-host momentarily, but once again, you have joined Intentional Conversations. Enjoy the show. Let the conversations begin indeed, and that is precisely what we're about to do. This is Intentional Conversations podcast. We also extract the audio and we make it available in podcast capacity for those of you who like to get your content that way. So we are in the month of June. It is my birthday month, and it is also Pride Month. And so I want to make sure that we take an opportunity to acknowledge a lot of national observances as we do week after week on Intentional Conversations. And I think it's critically important for us to find ways to make sure we're standing in solidarity with the LGBTQIA plus community. And this is a great month to really amplify that, but don't let it be just only the month of June. June is also the time when we celebrate Juneteenth, and that is actually June the 19th is the official date. If you are not aware of the history of Juneteenth, how it came to be, why it's even something that we now acknowledge and celebrate, I do encourage you to do some research for yourself. It's critically important. Many organizations now have truly leaned into the genesis of Juneteenth, and they've started to provide opportunities within their organizations for celebrations and programming to really just deepen people's knowledge and understanding of Juneteenth and the culture experience for the Black community. And so if that is something that you are interested in, and maybe it's not too late, I think that we're still at the beginning of June. And so if you're part of an organization and you want to bring a Juneteenth talk or programming to your place of work, then let us know. We would love to be in conversation with you. One of the things that we often like to share as part of intentional conversations are some of the resources that we have available even outside of our vodcast podcast. And we love to produce content, rich content that allows people to deepen their learning about all things diversity, equity, and inclusion, leadership. Our latest thought paper is called The Indispensable Role of Community and Connectedness. Such an important topic for this day and time where we're holding so many different challenges as we're navigating the complexities just of society in general. And so I want to make sure that you have this resource available to you for your toolkit. So my team will actually share a link directly to it into the chat and as well as into the comment section of LinkedIn. I hope that you will spend some time with this document and that you will take away some insights that maybe you can apply to all the many spaces that you have level of influence in. And by the way, there are tons of other thought papers that we have available too if you want to go back to our archives. Now, another opportunity that I am super excited about because we have been spending a lot of time really trying to lean into this phenomenon of the importance of community and connectedness. And as part of that, we have established multiple communities of practice. And these are not just cohorts, but these are cohorts that are really robust because part of the goal is that the individuals are learning with and from each other. They are bringing their own resources and tools, and there is a concerted effort around the collective capacity, not just the individual getting what they need, but the collective capacity of this group. We have several of them that are already formed and ready to go, that are aligned with many of the common challenges we're hearing from many of our clients right now, including the emotionally regulated leader. It's critically important. It does make a difference in how in which an emotionally regulated leader shows up to lead in terms of effectiveness. We have one on storytelling, which is all about building a culture of storytelling for inclusion, for connection, for change. The future-proof leader. I don't know about you, but right now, there are a lot of leaders who are not feeling well equipped to be able to handle the complexities of all that's happening right now in terms of leading at the highest level of effectiveness. And then we also have one called Boundless, which is a wellness program that centers on women, particularly women of color, but women helping them to navigate. Again, right now, what we're seeing is that women are being challenged in many regards in terms of the workplace and how to best show up and take up space in a way that serves them. And so we have many opportunities. My team will share a link for you all to learn more. We'd love to be in conversation with you about any of these communities of practice and even about curating one that is very specific to your organization based upon the pain points, the challenges, the content areas, and development opportunities that you are prioritizing. As I mentioned, storytelling is not just a community of practice, but it's also kind of a way of how we believe that organizations can really show up at the highest level. So let us help you to facilitate a storytelling cultural framework embedded into your organization. More data can be found on our website. My team will drop links to all of that data. Now, it does me great pleasure that right before I officially introduce today's guest co-host, that I give you an opportunity to understand what you have to look forward to in future weeks of Intentional Conversations podcast. And I'm excited because June 13th, that is Friday 13th, but we're not superstitious around here. It's going to be a great conversation. And I'm so excited to be able to welcome Sylvia Rhodes Labinow. And we're going to be discussing leadership and power. So I hope that you will join us on Friday the 13th. And then following that, on June the 20th, we have another amazing guest co-host that I'm super excited about. This is Dr. Joel Perez, and he's going to be discussing along with me curiosity and why it's a vital component of leadership and how it can build a strong company culture. So if you're interested in curiosity as one of those core values to strengthen workplace culture, I want you to make sure that you're joining us on June 20th. And as always, if you can't join live, you know that there's multiple ways you can get this content, either through the podcast. We'll also have the replays that are saved out on our YouTube channel. So lots of archiving that's out there if you want to go back and check out some previous shows. But we are doing all that we can to make sure that we can get this information to you and through you so that you can share it with others in your network. Now, okay, if you're new to the Intentional Conversations podcast, one thing that I always do every single week, no matter the situation, is I like to make sure that I provide a formal introduction of our guest co-host. And I do that by reading the individual's bio. Why? Because I truly believe that it is important for our community to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to Intentional Conversations with. And today will be no different. So I am so excited to be able to welcome Dr. Ingrid Waldron, who is a professor and Hope Chair in Peace and Health in the Global Peace and Social Justice Program in the Faculty of Humanities at McMaster University. She has conducted research on mental illness and help seeking among Black women and Black youth. Her research also focuses on dementia, cancer, and COVID-19 in Black communities and the health and mental impacts of environmental racism and climate change devastation in Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities. Dr. Ingrid is the author of the book, There's Something in the Water: Environmental Racism in Indigenous and Black Communities, which was turned into a 2020 Netflix documentary of the same name and was co produced by Waldron actor Elliot Page and Eon Daniel. She is the founder and director of the Environmental Noxiousness, Racial Inequities, and Community Health Project. The Enrich Project is also kind of how that's referred to, and helped develop the federal private members bill, a national strategy respecting environmental racism and environmental justice. It was approved at Senate on June 13th in 2024, just a year ago, and given royal assent on June 20th, 2024, becoming the first environmental justice law in Canada. Dr. Waldron's book, entitled From the Enlightenment to Black Lives Matter: Tracing the Impacts of Racial Trauma in Black Communities from the Colonial Era to the Present, was published on November 25th, 2024. Lots happened for Dr. Ingrid in 2024. It traces experiences of racial trauma in Black communities in Canada, the US, and the UK from the colonial era to the present. Now, you know what to do if you've been a part of our community. Find those accolades, find those words of affirmation, those reactions, all the things, right? And I want you to go to the chat and let our guest co-host, as I add her to the spotlight, know how grateful we are for her being here with us today, sharing with us. And I know it's going to be a rich conversation. And before I release you, Dr. Ingrid, we do have a tradition here at Intentional Conversations. And that is, before we release our guest co-host to greet the audience in their own way, we always ask that they consider sharing something with us that we would not know about them from hearing their bio, which we've just done, or from looking at your LinkedIn profile. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I'll turn the floor over to you at this time.
Thanks for having me. Let's see. Well, I've traveled a lot. I've lived in a lot of different cities. So I was born in Montreal, Quebec, the French part of Canada. And then my family moved to Ottawa for a few years. And then my father wanted us all to go to Trinidad. My both parents are from Trinidad and Tobago. So I spent about 5 years in Trinidad and Tobago. Then I returned to Montreal. And then I moved to Toronto because Montreal was going through a kind of an economic crisis. There was a recession. So I moved to Toronto where there were tons of jobs. And then I wanted to do my master's degree in England. So I got admitted to the University of London in London, England. And I lived there for about a year. My sister got me an internship at the World Health Organization in around 2001. So I spent some time in this kind of little village called Ferny-Voltaire. It was kind of right near to Geneva. It was a French town, but near to Geneva. And then I returned to Toronto. And then I moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. And then in 2021, I returned to Ontario. So I currently live in Burlington and I teach in Hamilton, Ontario. So I've now thinking back, I've lived in a lot of different cities, a lot of moving around, but all for my career. It's either for education or for my career.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I had a tickle in my throat. So fantastic. Yes, you definitely are well traveled, and I'm sure that all of those experiences certainly has garnered a lot of insight that shows up in the work that you do today and how you do that work. And so I look forward for us delving a little bit deeper into that into today's discussions. And so you shared a little bit about your background. I would love for you to take us through some of the most impressionable experiences in your life that has brought you to issues that you discuss in your book, or I should probably say books. So I want to get you to engage in that.
My book is about racial trauma, the impacts of anti-Black racism on the well-being, the mental well-being of Black communities in the UK, in the US, and in Canada. And I come to this topic based on my own experience as a Black woman in Canada, who at a particular time in my life, particularly in my early 20s, I was finding that I was having really challenges being promoted at a particular workplace. And you know, when you have those challenges as a Black person, you begin by blaming yourself. You start to wonder, what is it about me? What do I lack? That's causing me to not be able to be promoted year after year. And at one point, I just said to myself, it's not me. It's systemic racism, something I had rarely experienced. And I was in a workplace where I was the only one in that space with an undergraduate degree. Everyone had a high school education, but I was the only one with an undergraduate degree. But yet I would see these individuals with high school educations going past me all the
Mm,
time. And I remember coming home one day, I had my suit on from work and my high heel shoes. I had just found out that I hadn't gotten that job again, another promotion. And I remember throwing myself on my bed and weeping. I
mm,
always distinguish it from crying. I was weeping. I had my high heel shoes on and I threw myself on the bed. I was just frustrated, angry, and had had enough. And
mhm.
while that did not delve into depression or clinical depression or mental illness for me, it was having a real impact on my emotional well-being year after year, seeing people pass by me. And that day I just had enough. And I wanted to know whether other people were feeling the same. And when
Yeah.
I started doing my PhD, I was going to focus on something else, on the underachievement of Black students in the high school system in Canada. But I started to encounter readings and literature from the United States and from the UK about the mental health impacts of racism. And I found that to be extremely interesting and fascinating. So I went to my PhD supervisor and I said, can I change my topic? Because this literature I was finding from the US, Black women, Black feminist scholars, and the mental health impacts of racism and sexism was resonating with me. And I thought there's a whole body of literature
Yes.
based on how I'm feeling. As I said, I started to question myself and what I lacked, but realized that there's something called systemic racism and that I had experienced it. So I come to this work. I'm very much focused on racism in my scholarship. I'm a race scholar. Um, Unabashedly, I'm a race. I know it's not fashionable these days, but I'm a race scholar. I also am very much a Black feminist scholar. And I'm interested in looking at the impacts of anti-Black racism on mental health, and it's because of my own personal experiences.
Okay, so I want to just take a moment to lean into what you just shared with us. First, there was a lot that I think needs to be amplified. Dr. Ingrid, there are a lot of people, and I know that your research has also proven this, which is why you're so passionate about the work that you do. And I love that you stand unapologetically into the title of being a race scholar, among other accolades. But I want to go back to when you said oftentimes people will blame themselves, and that was your situation. You blamed yourself because we thought, "What is wrong with me?" And there was finally a point to where you realize it's not me, it's the system. And I just wanted to lift that out of our conversation because that has been a recurring theme for so many women of color that have experienced situations like yours where you felt overlooked, undervalued, unqualified when all the credentials were there. And so we can't overemphasize the importance of recognizing this is not something about us, it is about the system. The thing that I think is really important too, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I believe that there are so many others that have, of late, the past maybe, most recent, 5 to 10 years, started really leaning into recognizing the importance of raising awareness around women of color's experience in the workplace because of how it is tied very much to mental health issues. And that's why there's been a lot of talk about radical self care and all the ways in which to try to prevent burnout. Are you also seeing from your vantage point that this increase and this groundswell of just bringing awareness as a is it really helping to affect change in that particular area? What's your perspective on that?
I think it is. Back in 2020, I completed a research project on the experiences of Black women in Nova Scotia, experiences with mental health issues and help seeking. And the person who asked me to conduct that study said, Ingrid, if you could just do this study and we can get some data, the government is promising that they will open up a new initiative for Black women's health specifically. This is the first in Canada. It was called, or it is called, the Sisterhood Initiative. So I completed that project, as I said, in 2020, handed over the final report to the government. And about 3 years later, was it 2023, it launched, surprisingly. So we have now in Nova Scotia the first ever initiative, health service for Black women. So I think Black people are understanding these issues more and more and starting to advocate for services and different initiatives because they are aware that anti-Black racism, sexism, and other forms of discrimination have a real impact on their mental health. And the stigma that we have in the Black community, it's a very strong stigma against help seeking for mental illness and undermining the impacts of racism on our mental health. I think that stigma is eroding. I see much more conversations among Black people, Black women, about help seeking. I have friends who are open about the fact that they're seeing therapists like never before. I think about 20 years ago, they would have never revealed this. But I have I have Black female friends who say, oh yes, my therapist told me. And I'm like, and there's no shame and there's no, which is great, no shame and no embarrassment. And this may be happening more with, of course, younger folks, because in Canada and North America, we are talking about mental illness more. So I
Yes.
see a sea change in terms of us wanting to recognize that racism has an impact on our mental health and the importance of seeking help and the importance of calling on government to create new initiatives to address our mental health issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to one up the just, naturally bring it into general conversations, the fact that we have therapists, because that is important. It helps to kind of, normalize that. And so I appreciate you bringing that to the conversation. So I'm glad that you are seeing some stick it to itness, if you will, around people leaning into this whole idea of being much more intentional through that level of awareness to try to provide support, culture type of, I guess, protocols to make sure that women, especially women of color and Black women, are able to thrive in those environments. But and I also know that you're based in Canada. I would imagine that you also have maybe many clients that you also serve in the States. Is that accurate to say, Dr. Ingrid?
I haven't personally done any
Okay.
research in the States, but much of the literature
Oh
on
yeah,
this topic comes from the United States. When I started my work on mental health issues and race, when I started my PhD, there was literally nothing in Canada. So I was forced to go to the literature
got
in
it.
the United States and to the UK, and was just really surprised at how much there was on Black women specifically,
Yes.
and mental health and self-care and the impacts on health in general. But I haven't done any work in the United States. Most of my work comes from the literature that I've seen. The research I've done has been in Nova Scotia, has been in Ontario.
Well, I can tell you, and probably many in this community can attest to this, because we are, well ingrained in what's happening here in the U.S. Is that what you're speaking of? It doesn't surprise me that a lot of that research may have come from the U.S. because those are everyday occurrences and stories that we hear about. So there's definitely a lot of continuity in terms of those experiences, even outside of the U.S. The point that I wanted us to unpack a little bit is that in the States, we are seeing a lot of organizations that have been deeply committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, having to now reimagine how in which they are providing those services and support, particularly to those marginalized, I like to say underestimated professionals and communities. Now, when it comes to Black women, one thing that I am seeing is even those organizations that maybe prior to the current administration were very much in favor of having targeted support programming systems initiatives in favor of addressing the disparities for women of color. And I'm using the two interchangeably, but I do want to talk specifically about Black women in this question because, again, a part of what I'm hearing a lot of people say, practitioners right now, is that what we're seeing is not so much just anti-DEI, they're saying it is anti-Black. And we need to make sure that we are bringing that nuance conversation into this broader topic of how can we sustain this work. And so I just want to get your perspectives from your level of familiarity with what's happening in the States, and maybe you're seeing some similar things also kind of apply in some of the clients that you're working with in other areas. But share your thoughts on that.
I think what's problematic is when people hear about DEI, or in Canada we say EDI, they
Yeah,
assume it's about Black people and they assume it's about race. We know that
yeah, so
it's about
much broader.
gender. Yes, gender, it's race, it's culture, it's sexual orientation, but yet they focus on the race, which is part of the
Yes.
anti-Black racism once again. This is about not wanting Black people to advance. This
Yeah.
focus on race, when it's not simply about race, tells me that people simply don't want Black people to advance, and they see this as a racial issue. And yes, I realize what's happening in the States. I know there's a kind of unraveling of DEI initiatives in the States. It's happening in Canada too, but not in such an overt way. So, I mean,
Sure.
the way Trump is operating, he's just dismantling it. It's very overt and it's very aggressive. In Canada, these DEI initiatives kind of popped up in the wake of the George Floyd tragedy. And I'm a university professor, so I saw it in universities. We are making a commitment to EDI. We're going to do this over the next 5 years, and everybody was a bit hopeful. Black people were a bit hopeful. But I remember a student approaching me, and she said, "Dr. Waldron, I'm a little scared." I said, "What are you scared about? This is great. Look, there's EDI. Things are changing." She said, "I don't know. I feel like at some point it's all going to stop." And at that point, I thought, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. It's not going to stop, because there was so much energy behind it. And I
Yeah.
hate to say
Yeah.
that now that I look back 5 years ago, this student was right. Because when she came to
Mhm.
me, she was like, I'm scared, Professor Waldron, I'm scared. She was right, because what I'm seeing in Canada, while we're not unraveling it in such an aggressive way as it's happening in the States, there's a silence I'm
Yeah.
finding. There were little important initiatives like cohort hiring at universities, where you would hire 20 Black professors, new professors in different
Yeah.
departments. That has stopped, right? That was happening in several universities. I'm not hearing anything about that. And all the initiatives that universities and other organizations were talking about, there's a silence now. So while our unraveling of DEI is not as aggressive, perhaps, or overt as it is in the States, to me, it's just as bad. The silence is deafening, right?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that. So Toki is part of our community. I want to lift out with some of what's happening in the chat. She mentioned that systemic and covert racism in Canada makes it easy for society to look the other way, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. And it goes with what you just shared, Dr. Ingrid. I also want to bring emphasis to a point that Andrea Payne in the chat has also lifted out, which is the fact that, as you mentioned, diversity is so broad. There's so many different dimensions of diversity, and the same experience that you have, in Canada and other areas in which you do this work, we see it all the time in the States as well, is where people automatically they hear DEI, and there's such a visceral reaction, because they go immediately to race. And
Yes.
I it is broad. We're talking about disability, we're talking about accessibility.
Yes.
The way disability, there's both visible and invisible. There's so many different
Yes.
dimensions. But what I'm also very much curious about and still continue to try to keep a pulse on is that sometimes if we aren't careful and we talk about only just the broad spectrum of all the dimensions of diversity, it's
Yeah.
almost like it gives some people, some
Yeah.
individuals a pass to not deal
Yes.
directly with the anti-blackness
Yes.
that is so
Yes.
pervasive. And I just don't want
Yes.
that to be missed from today's conversation.
And I
Um,
think 20
yeah,
years ago, we started using that term anti-Black racism, just to let people know there's a
yeah,
specific flavor. There's a
yes,
specific
yes,
flavor of racism for Black people. Don't get it confused with other types. This whole women of color, people of color, I've never engaged with, because I know that our experiences are different from people who are South Asian, who are
yeah,
Asian, who are
yeah.
indigenous, right? We share similarities, but we have a specific brand of racism in the Black community, and we don't want people to forget about that.
100%, 100%. So thank you for helping me to kind of echo that. Now I want to go back to your book. Something that you discussed in your book is racialization of psychiatric diagnosis. Can you explain to us what that means and why is that an important part of this broad conversation?
It's an interesting concept that I think was coined by Dr. Sunan Fernando. He died earlier this year. He was about 90 something years old. He's a bit of a hero of mine. He's a Sri Lankan British psychiatrist scholar, and he researched mental illness, and particularly schizophrenia, in the Black community in England. And what he found was, and what I found in the United States as well, is that Black people are overdiagnosed with schizophrenia, particularly Black men. So there's a gender and racial
Mm.
component to the diagnosis of schizophrenia. There's a great book in the United States by a US professor who teaches at Vanderbilt University, Jonathan Metzl. It's called The Protest Psychosis: How Schizophrenia Became a Black Disease. So I think
Mm,
this is cogent work. I don't think it can be dismissed. So the racialization of psychiatric diagnoses means that we have socially constructed ideologies about certain mental illnesses. So on the
mm,
one hand, we think of schizophrenia and the way schizophrenia is portrayed in popular culture, in the media. It's portrayed as the worst mental illness you can have. It's portrayed as extremely pathological, violent, hostile,
mm.
aggressive, right? On the one hand, you've got that perception of schizophrenia. On the one hand, you have the perception of blackness, of the black body, of black people, particularly black men, once again, as
Yes,
hostile, as aggressive,
yes,
as extremely
yes,
pathological, as to be feared, just like in schizophrenia, to be feared, right? So you've got two socially constructed elements, right? And in the diagnostic process, when, for example, a black man is being diagnosed, those two perceptions, socially constructed perceptions, collide in the diagnostic process, to where black men tend to be either misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed with schizophrenia. Black women tend to be underdiagnosed with depression. Why? I would say it's because Black women in popular culture, but we also kind of talk about ourselves in a particular way. Black women are seen as strong, like, and we love that stereotype of us. We think it's a good stereotype. It's good to a certain extent, but we say, I'm a strong Black woman. I'm a strong, independent Black woman, and people see us that way. Therefore, it's very difficult for people to see Black women as depressed and sad in the same way that they see white women. So Black women are also misdiagnosed and underdiagnosed or overdiagnosed with schizophrenia, and underdiagnosed with affective disorders. Black women, affective disorders like depression and bipolar disorder. There's an underdiagnosis of Black women for that. So what this construct of the racialization of psychiatric diagnosis basically is that all of this is socially constructed.
yes.
I'm not negating that there is mental illness and that people have mental
Sure,
illness. I'm saying
sure.
that the way in which we label people, the way in
Yeah,
which we see people, the way we understand them, our perceptions and ideologies, for example, of the Black body, very much collides with our ideologies and the social construction of certain mental illnesses like schizophrenia. So when you've got a mental illness that's seen as scary, hostile, to be feared, and then the Black body seen similarly in that diagnostic process, when that psychiatrist is labeling and diagnosing Black people, those biases come into play. A psychiatrist is just a human being, after
of
all,
course.
right? So they're
Yeah.
susceptible. They're susceptible and vulnerable to all of the stereotypes of Black people that everybody else is.
Yeah, Dr. Ingrid, this data is so insightful, so incredibly important. And once again, it just reinforces that what we experience as people of color, as Black people, has a lot to do with what's in the system. And it is deep, deep, deep in the system to
Yes.
where sometimes it can feel almost defeating, as though, are we ever going to be able to get our way out of this?
Mhm.
This condition is such a deep level. So your work is so important. So I want to acknowledge that, and I want to say thank you. Thank you for helping to bring greater awareness to these conversations. I placed in the chat, not as much anymore, and that was in response to you saying that we like being strong. At one point we did. We love being strong. We love being considered resilient. And then finally we started kind of catching up with that. And wait a minute, life of ease. Be seen as resilient, because then I don't get the benefit of the doubt of being able to need people to show up for me, to be
Yes.
empathetic, and yes, and to support
Yes.
me in ways that, that I
Yes.
may be falling vulnerable. And so I do like that there is now this start of a shift that is helping to bring a little more balance. Still a lot more work to be done, but a little more balance to that. It's almost like in the US, after the administration, it was like the 92%. There's 92% of
Yeah.
Black women that, yeah, no, I'm not it.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah.
look for me to kind of help save the world right now.
And you know
No.
why that change is important? Yes, it sounds great to say I'm strong. Black people are strong. Look what we've been through and look how resilient we are. I know on the surface it seems positive. The negative aspect of that is that then we are seen as not deserving care and empathy. When
Heat.
you're strong and resilient,
Absolutely.
people think, oh, they can take it. They can
Yes.
take it. So any kind of harm or hurt that we mete out to Black folks, they can take it, and that means we don't deserve the same type of care as other people. So when we think of like somebody like Serena Williams, who I believe was on the cover of the Time magazine in 2017 about her birthing experience,
Yes.
negative experiences that she encountered had a lot to do with, I think, her being a Black woman and being seen as strong. So there was a lack of care, lack of sensitivity and empathy afforded to her. And we know that this is a bit of a phenomenon with Black women in the United States in terms of birthing issues, mortality rates among newborns and mothers, right? And a lot of that has to do with the lack of care, sensitivity, and empathy that tends to be meted out to Black women because we are seen as the pillars of the Black community, as mules of the world, and as people who can simply take it. And that's
Yeah.
problematic.
That is so true. So you're taking me back, and I'm going to digress just for a brief moment. But I do want to share this story. It kind of relates to what you mentioned about Serena Williams. And so I have adult kids. For those of you who may not be familiar, I have adult kids, so they're grown now. But I remember when I was having my son, which was my second child, barely made it to the hospital. I mean, barely made it to the hospital. And I remember the nurse saying to me, "Honey, you got to hyperventilate. Just take some deep breaths, almost like it's no big deal. It's no big deal." The next thing I know, I'm on the table and the red lights going off, people are running in, and my husband's like grabbing the nurse's arm because she's going to like check me or something, and he sees that I'm in pain, and she says, "That's not me, that's your son's head." And I'm thinking, okay, just a moment ago I was about to hyperventilate, right? And now all these emergency signals are going off because he's not getting oxygen. She was saying that about my baby, my child, my son. And so I think that is so true, and I never connected that experience to what you just shared, because again, I wasn't in that space where I was fixating on those things.
Mm-hmm.
But now when I think about it, would that have been the same experience if it had been someone that didn't look like
Right.
me?
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Didn't look like me. And she was
Yeah.
totally diminishing my experience. It was like,
Yeah.
"Honey, you gotta hyperventilate."
That's right.
Oh, okay. Let me calm myself down. So I'm taking myself back to that place. Okay. So I want to get the audience into this conversation. If you have a question or some curiosities that are bubbling up for you, I know I have lots more questions that I can present to Dr. Ingrid. But if you have some questions and comments, I want to give you a chance to be a part of the discussion and to contribute. If you're part of our Zoom community, you can do so by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that I can invite you to unmute yourself. And if your camera's on, I'll even add you to the spotlight. Or feel free to continue to use the chat to present your questions and thoughts. And if you're on LinkedIn Live and that's how you're joining the conversation today, not to worry, go to the comment section. We're watching that closely. We'll bring some questions and thoughts and expressions over here so that we can, again, be connected as one large community. While you're percolating on that, I do want to go to my next question for Dr. Ingrid, just to give you a chance to kind of think through your questions and contributions. I'm still on your book because there's so much insight that we can unpack. And by the way, I will ask the team to please share into the chat your book that we are referencing right now. So for folks who want to get the book, I hope that you will support and to do a deeper dive into some of the insights that are being shared today. In your book, you use an intersectional analysis to discuss the factors that shape help seeking for Black women and Black men. And you've touched on this briefly, but I feel it will be important for this community to hear a little bit further you expand upon that. So can you talk more about that, please?
Yeah. We know that African American woman Kimberly Crenshaw created
Yes.
this concept of
Intersectionality.
intersectional analysis, and it's obviously a framework that I use in my work because there's not one way to be a Black woman. If you are lower
Right.
income or poor Black woman, your experience will be very different from a higher income Black woman. If you are a Black gay woman, your experience will be different from a heterosexual Black woman. So it's certainly a framework throughout my work. And when I talk specifically about help seeking among Black men and Black women, I talk about the ways in which those intersections shape the type of care that they seek out. So I spend some time in my book talking about Black people who are trans, Black men who are trans, Black women who are gay. So looking at the Black LGBTQ community, which I don't think there's enough written about that.
Yeah.
And lower income Black folks and how they seek care. The fact that they don't often have the income to seek the kind of care that they need. Um, when I talk about Black gay women, I talk about the relationships and how sometimes trauma in those relationships, intimate partner violence, how does that look in gay relationships and how does that impact them? I talk about immigrant Black women who come from Africa, different African countries, to the United States or to Canada. They have very, very specific experiences of help seeking. Help seeking and mental illness is often a taboo in various African countries, and they may have experienced war back home or religious persecution or political persecution. So they're experiencing, when they come to Canada, the United States, they already have mental health problems, but were never diagnosed. So they're
Right.
less likely to seek care when they come to North America. And plus, of course, the stigma and taboo of doing that, because it's not the norm back in Nigeria to go and seek help for mental illness. And mental illness is often dismissed. So the immigrant experience is very, very unique and very specific. And because they're newcomers, they may not be able to find those services initially. And maybe the settlement agency is where they go. So they're not going to a formal clinical service, but they're going to a settlement agency that's helping them to address their language issues or their employment issues or their educational issues. And even though those may not be seen as mental health issues, they are. Because if we understand the structural determinants of health lens, we know that
Yes.
if you're having problems with employment, if you're having problems with settling in, those lead to health issues, those lead to mental health stressors. So I try to also talk about the fact that even if you are not accessing traditional formal clinical services and you're going to the neighborhood community center or to the community-based organization or the settlement agency, it is help seeking in terms of your mental health care, because you're
Yeah.
trying to address all of those upstream factors that impinge on your mental well-being. So that's how I kind of look at that intersectional piece in terms of trying to bring out the different experiences of help seeking, of self-care, that women, Black women and Black men have based on their identity, whether it's gender identity, trans identity, their social class, their income level.
I appreciate that. I see a question in the chat and I'm going to get to it in just a moment, but I amplified your words. There's not one way to be a Black woman. And we actually can fill in the blank no matter who you are. I think that we have to continue to remind people no one community, no one group is a monolith. And definitely there's not one way to show up in that identity. So thank you for expressing that. What I love, Dr. Ingrid, about your approach is that you peel back the layers, you get to the root cause. It's not just this surface type of awareness that you're bringing. You're helping people to really connect the dots to all of those areas that kind of thread through to the outcomes we're seeing that are harmful. And I love that approach because I think it's powerful. And I also think that that is how we're going to be able to really eradicate the change that we want to see in terms of eradicating the issues. Because if we're just solving it on the surface level, we're not really solving anything at all. It's just this vicious cycle. So
Yes.
the fact that you brought into the conversation the intersectionality piece, as well as kind of the health inequities that certainly lead to a lot of the mental health issues, and how in which that help seeking is so important, I think is great. And it's Pride Month, so I'm so glad that this was an opportunity for you to also kind of uplift the LGBTQ community, the Black community, and how some of those issues that may not be a part of the narrative right now, they
Mhm.
need to be. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. Okay, so here is a question from our community. Hi, Dr. Ingrid. Thank you so much for joining us today. Do you mind sharing some ways the Black community can continue to address and combat generational trauma? Great question. Thank you.
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't want to let the mental health system off the hook because um, they need to address our issues. We are just like everybody else. We are
Yep.
clients and our issues need to be addressed. I think as Black people, and I know we talk about this all the time, that we need to stop relying on the system, um, and we need to start relying more on ourselves. And I think if we can, and we do this, but we need to do it more. We need to be able to get together and start our own initiatives. When I think of the Sisterhood Project that I mentioned earlier in Nova Scotia, the first health service for Black women in all of Canada, that was an initiative that came together because a few loud voices in the Black community said, we need this, right? And it's partially government and they were responsible for funding it, but it was a Black social worker who came to me to ask me to do the research. It's a Black organization that was kind of spearheading it, and it was a bunch of Black folks coming together to say we want this, and we advocated for it and we got it. Just 3 years later, things take a long time in Canada and particularly in Nova Scotia. The fact that we got it in 3 years is incredible. So I think while we are also asking the system, the mental health system, to respond to our needs, and we have a right to that, we need to continue to rely on ourselves to create our own initiatives. And this is something Black people have done, but we need to do more of that. One of the things that's a barrier to doing that is, I hate to say it, but we need to stop the infighting, right?
Mm.
Everybody
Yeah.
wants credit. Everybody wants to be the lead. I've seen this where we just can't,
Mm.
kind of come together without all the egos and create something wonderful. Sometimes I think we are our own worst enemy. So I think we've got to kind of put down the swords and come together. It's not about who leads or who's responsible, or right, get the egos aside and start developing more initiatives that respond to our own needs. At the same time, as I said, we do need to advocate, and we need to make sure that clinicians and the mental health system is listening to our needs. And in my final chapter in the book, I talk about a multi-layered approach to addressing racial trauma. Universities, I'm in a university and I don't see enough Black professors there. I'm one of very few in
Yeah.
my universities. In terms of the health department, people doing mental health like me, very few. If and typically white professors are not teaching what I'm talking about in this book. So if
Yeah.
future health professionals, those students in classrooms right now, in nursing school, in occupational therapy schools, in the faculties of medicine, if those students aren't being taught what I'm discussing in this book, then they're going to go out and start providing clinical care without thinking about race, without understanding the importance of understanding the impact of racism, and particularly anti-Black racism, on mental health. So the universities have a lot of work to do in terms of the courses that they're offering. Funding streams for people like myself who, I apply for grants, I get grants, and there are funding streams that I apply to. There are no funding streams specifically for Black scholars. There are for other racial groups in Canada, but not for Black scholars. So we need more
Yeah.
funding streams for Black scholars or people who just want to do Black mental health research. The root of all of this is oftentimes research, right? Research can shape what's happening clinically, right? So when you have the research there and the data there, then clinicians will take that and use that research and the data to inform what they're doing. The other thing that's really important is policy. I always say that
Yeah.
policy is the root of everything, whether we're talking about discrimination in employment, discrimination in labor, discrimination in the immigration system, discrimination in criminal justice and policing. The root of it is
Mhm.
always policy. Who are those
Yeah.
policy makers who are creating policies that impact people on the ground? Do they look like me? Typically, I can speak for Canada. No, they don't. They don't look like me. They don't have my social positioning. Therefore, they navigate their worlds in a particular way, as for example, a white middle class man. Can they truly understand my experience as a Black woman and the mental health issues that impact me? Probably not, unless they're educated, right? So we need to diversify who we're hiring in terms of mental health policymakers, because they are the root of this, right? Because they inform clinical services, they inform clinical programs, they inform whatever's happening in the mental health system. So we need to diversify mental health policymakers. We need to diversify the health systems workforce, right? We need more Black nurses. We need more Black occupational therapists. We need more Black psychologists. Right now in Canada, it's pretty white, our health workforce and our mental health workforce. And what has been said to me time and time again throughout all my studies by Black individuals is that I want to see people who look like me. I want more cultural competence. I want my culture, my race, and my gender to be taken into account when I am receiving care. But I also want somebody who looks like me, not because I'm racist, but because I think that person who has a similar culture to me may be able to understand me a little bit more. Not necessarily, and I'm not saying that they would, but they may be able to, and I feel more comfortable with them. And when I've gone to other folks who are not of my culture, I have felt dismissed. and I've been treated poorly and I've never gone back. But I would like to see more people who look like me because I think they might understand me a bit more. So I think those are all of I think these are the things that Black people need to advocate for more. And in Canada, that's happening. There are Black organizations that have been advocating for this. Unlike the United States, unfortunately, in the United States, you have long collected data on health. You can say that Black men disproportionately are affected by prostate cancer in the United States.
Yes.
And that's a
Yes.
fact. We can't say
Right.
anything like that in Canada because our government does not collect race-based data, which is a
Interesting.
huge problem, right? So we can't say anything. We can't say Black women have higher rates of breast cancer. We can't say anything. We have the qualitative work that I and others do, but we need the government to collect race-based data. They started to do that when COVID happened. And to their surprise in Canada, they found that South Asian and Black people were disproportionately impacted by COVID. But those initiatives to collect race-based data due to COVID has stopped largely in Canada,
Yeah.
right? So that's the root of it. Those are things that we have to
Well,
continue as Black people in Canada and the United States to advocate for.
absolutely. It's interesting that you're paying the state some kind of a compliment and saying that we collect that race-based data, but I'll tell you, the current administration is really challenging a lot of that.
Yeah.
And so we have to remain vigilant and just,
Uh,
maintain the importance of that data. I mean, even some of the practical things that you talked about in terms of diversifying the healthcare profession with more people that look like us, right? Like you and
yeah.
I. This community knows I've shared before. I will travel, 2 hours or so to see my Black dermatologist, my Black woman dermatologist.
Wow.
And I have a Black primary care physician that I have brought other family members over to because I truly
Wow.
believe that as well. And so,
Yes.
yes, those are some really practical strategies. And I love the fact that you've amplified. There's a both and. Sometimes we sit back and we think it is solely on the government. They need to help fix all these problems. But if we do that, we could be waiting all of our lives, right?
Yes.
Sometimes we have to be able to take control where we can have control and be able to create some level of upward mobility for our own selves. And
Yes.
so I think definitely the both and was really resonant with me. And I wanted to kind of just amplify that. Okay, so we have not talked yet, Dr. Ingrid, about the environmental racism, which I know is very much also a part of your work. So I do want to make sure that we spend some time as we are getting to the top of the hour about environmental racism and how it's often an invisible crisis, right? And so it's definitely something that needs greater attention. And in your groundbreaking work and your book, there's something in the water. How do you approach making these injustices visible? And then what has changed in Canada since the book and the Netflix documentary series released?
Well, you've got the father of environmental justice in the United States, Dr. Robert Bullard. He teaches at a university in Texas. I had the pleasure of hosting him. He was a keynote speaker at a symposium I held in Canada in Halifax in 2017. So he's a bit of my hero. So I think Americans, African Americans, are very familiar with this term environmental racism.
Yep.
Um, think back to Flint, Michigan, when they opened their tap water
Yes.
and it was brown. Think of
Yes.
Cancer Alley, in Louisiana. It's a Black area surrounded by petrochemical facilities and on and on. The indigenous communities in United States as well. So I think you're familiar with this term that
Yep.
government tends to disproportionately place toxic facilities in Black and indigenous communities. And that's happening in Canada as well. Um, how did I make it visible? For me, it's always about community engaged research, community based research. My research is community based, which means that it's about providing opportunities and spaces for the communities impacted to help lead my research. So most professors will lead, most professors will say, these are what my research objectives are, these are what my research questions are, and there we go. And I knew I had to do it differently. I had to develop relationships first with the communities impacted. So in 2013, I drove down to the indigenous communities. I drove down to the Black communities. I got to know them. I asked them, what do you want me to do? What do you think my research objective should be? What do you think my research questions should be? And then I carried on by keeping that in my consciousness about what they wanted rather than
Yes.
what I wanted as a professor, right?
Mm.
and making it visible was really important too. And they already make it visible, the communities, because they're engaged in civil disobedience and different resistance movements. So before I came along, they were doing the activist work, right? But there wasn't a lot of scholarly work. So the activism and the civil disobedience that they were engaged in was very much amplified by my research, because my research would get attention. I know that I have privilege because I'm a professor, so people would come to me and ask me about it. But I would also share with them the stories of the communities, Black communities, Indigenous communities that were experiencing environmental racism. And many of the journalists that I spoke with would say, "Oh, can you connect me? Can you connect me to a community member?" Because they love that, right? They love the data that I can provide, but what they love even more is to be able to connect to a community member who can share with them a story, because it's a much more interesting read. So for me, making sure that it continues to be community based, amplifying the voices of community members, is the way that I made it visible. I also made it visible in terms of how I shared my data. So my first book was focused on environmental racism, and as you know, a Netflix documentary, shockingly, came out of that. It's a very long story, but I connected with Canadian actor Elliot Page, who you might know from X-Men with X-Men and Inception with Leonardo DiCaprio and many movies. We connected on Twitter back in 2018. And I never knew at that time that it was going to lead to a Netflix documentary, my very first book, and based on my very first book. We went to
Mhm.
the Toronto International Film Festival to premiere the documentary in 2019. Then we heard rumblings it may go to Netflix, and then it did. And starting March 29th, 2020, just after COVID hit, it was streaming on Netflix and Apple TV and Microsoft Xbox and Amazon Prime. Nowhere in my mind did I ever think this would happen to me and to my very first book. That has really amplified the issue. I mean, if you have a Netflix documentary, of course it's going to amplify the issue. I heard from people all around the world saying to me, "I can't believe this is happening in Canada. I thought Canada was a beacon of justice and equity." Or I would have people in Nova Scotia, because the film was kind of based in Nova Scotia, say, "I live in Nova Scotia. I had no idea this was happening." Right? It really amplified the issue to where the invitations that I got to speak just doubled. And the
Mm,
women in the film, they got massive invitations to speak. 2 years ago, they were at Harvard University speaking. I mean, they basically had a second career, which made me very happy. And speaking opportunities that were paid
mm,
opportunities. This
mm.
made me so proud. And I think most importantly, it's just the film inspired people. People contacted me once again from around the world saying, "Those women in the film, Dr. Waldron, they inspire me. Can you tell me how I can help you?" Music to my ears, right?
Yes.
So I think the knowledge sharing, certainly the film, the documentary, Netflix, the Toronto International Film Festival, all of these things have helped to amplify it to where now I get very few people saying to me in Canada, "What's environmental racism?" Which was a question I got all the time when I began. Nobody knew what it was. And now there's an understanding of it, which is really all that I wanted.
Yes. No, I love that. And I'm glad that you're proud of yourself, because you should be. And we're proud of you as well, Dr. Ingrid. So give us the name. How can we find this documentary? What is the name of the documentary and the name of the book? I want to make sure we can place that into the chat before we leave.
Okay, so my book is called There's Something in the Water, Environmental Racism in Indigenous and Black Communities. You can find that on Amazon and
Mhm.
bookstores and libraries. The film is called There's Something in the Water, so just the first part.
Yep.
And it's no longer streaming on Netflix. We had a 3-year contract. I believe
Okay.
it's still on Apple TV, I think, still
Okay.
on Microsoft Xbox and Amazon Prime. Those who are affiliated with libraries at universities, there's a
Hmm.
platform at most universities called Canopy. You can get any film there, including mine. So you just have to have a library login, and perhaps also your public libraries.
I was going to say, yeah, those library cards are still very useful for those of us who've forgotten about them.
Yeah.
No, this has been amazing, amazing, amazing. So much great insight that you've shared with us, and so I'm so grateful that you were willing to share with our community. So thank you. I want to give you the final 30 seconds to kind of close this out in whatever way that feels appropriate for you. Before I do so, I want to thank this community for showing up week after week. If this has been valuable to you, share it out with someone else. Let them also benefit from the great insights that Dr. Ingrid Waldron has shared today. So I'll turn it over to you for final remarks.
I think one of the things I heard a lot during some of my interviews for my studies was this notion that seeking help for mental illness is a weakness. If you have a mental illness, you are weak. Black people are better than that. Black people, we don't do that. That's for other people. Seeking help for mental illness is a white people thing. Not that the people who were my participants necessarily believe that, but they say they come from cultures and families that believe that, and that has influenced them. So I want to say, as I part today, mental illness and having a mental health problem is not a weakness. Seeking help is not a weakness. Being able to share with a therapist your deepest issues and problems and being vulnerable, to me, is a strength. Anyone who can do that is strong. So I think I want to share that with the Black community. For people, individuals in the Black community who are hesitant to seek out help, and they're struggling right now, or they're suicidal and they're hesitant to seek help, or they refuse to seek help, please seek help. It's a strength. It's beautiful. And it helps you when you see a therapist, more than helping you with mental illness, it helps you to connect the dots. Not everybody goes to a therapist for clinical depression. They go because they want to make a
Right.
sense of their lives, or they may have a decision that they want to make, or they want to know why they keep repeating behaviors over and over again. Like, that's a reason I would go to a therapist, right? Why do I keep having these experiences? I want somebody to turn on the light bulb for me, because I cannot be objective, and a therapist can be objective, and they help you connect the dots. So you don't have to seek out a therapist just for a serious mental health problem. It's also to elevate your life, to make connections, to have somebody who's objective tell you about your patterns, the patterns that have been hurting you. So for Black folks, please seek help if you need help. If you're suicidal, you're depressed, you have other issues, trust me, it can be extremely helpful, and you're not weak.
We co-sign. Thank you so much, Dr. Ingrid. We hope that we can have you to return because I know there's so much more that you can share. Thank you all. Have a safe and healthy weekend, and we'll see you back again next week for another episode of Intentional Conversations. Bye-bye.
Thank you.